Shall we? Take two. It's probably something that we want. And anyone who has the audacity to use Gemini as a moniker, do all your videos twice and in two places at once, like Instagram and YouTube, and all that's happening. Friends, my clock this morning somehow believes the Earth just did that, right? Daylight losings crime. They call it daylight savings time. It was once called wartime, which should be interesting. The idea is you could save energy in the factories that were building weapons if you just performed this weird sorcery with your clocks. In the first place, are clocks natural time? So I want to speak today about natural time and about daylight losings crime. It is said, although I don't know how true it is, that there was a native wisdom keeper who voiced these words about daylight savings crime. Only the white man is foolish enough to believe you can cut the end off of a blanket, sew it to the other side of the blanket, and believe you have a longer blanket. Daylight losings crime. Now, I guess there's an opportunity for Californians to vote to stop doing daylight savings crime, daylight losings crime, daylight savings time, whatever this thing is. I'll run to the polls. And we do have the states of Hawaii and Arizona not complying to the daylight losings crime philosophy at this time. It's hard to find accurate birth times sometimes for folks who are born in places like Illinois at certain times in history because places were kind of resisting daylight crime and then going back to it and whatnot. So first of all, let's just talk about time in general, right? One thing that, as an earth astronomer, I feel personally jaded by is that new cage idea that time isn't complete illusion, and that for us to release duality consciousness and to return to spirit, we have to understand that time is just some human, probably patriarchal creation to keep us out of the natural flow. But there is no flow without time, all right? So I feel probably is indeed true that, in the realm of oneness, of pure spirit, yes, time is not a thing there because one is all, it is everything, right? I mean, I think the whole point of places like this, and I mean Earth or other places with the appearance of time and space, is so we can incarnate to grow. Now, you can't grow without movement. You can't move without the appearance of time and space. Time is absolutely necessary, and it's very real in our 3D, or let's say 4-dimensional experience. Why 4-dimensional? Well, we have the X, Y, and Z of the thing, right? The length, width, and height of the thing. But we also have the dimension of time, right? So we talk about space-time, and I think, in this moment, I can see these 3 dimensions of space. Well, there's also time-space, right? Which is when we can become still, typically in sleep, deep meditation, maybe other practices, right? That allow us, in a sense, to kind of paralyze the body in space, and then a 3-dimensional experience of time can open, where maybe the past and the present come together. I think there are little sciences like astrology that help us understand the cyclical nature of time, that help us understand more about where we're going when we can reflect more upon where we're coming from. It's something I've been speaking about much more lately. But, I'm an astronomer, right? And so when I think about time, it's about this, and it's certainly not some construct, right? We're on a planet that spins and orbits. There is rotation and revolution, right? I mean, the sun changes signs about every month. Why? Because Earth is orbiting the sun. See, sunlight is one light, The sun's not changing. The earth is changing the sun just based upon where the sun is in respect to our rotational pole, our axis of our daily motion, right? Which defines the cardinal directions. And yes, my friends, the earth-astronomical zodiac, which is the tropical zodiac, is like so many systems of ancient wisdom traditions, directionally aligned. In fact, it is directionally defined. Every year when the earth points to the sun in this way, when the sun is on the earth's northern axis and it shines directly above tropical Cancer, this is the sun entering the tropic of Cancer, right? I said those backwards, but they're really one and the same thing. And the whole point of the ecliptic, which is the plane of our year, in its tilt with respect to the equator, which is the plane of the day, well, that's what makes tropical astronomy and tropical astrology like the zodiac of Earth. Speaking of, at the end of this flow, or rant as it were, I'll do a little bit of sun, moon, earth astrology. So whether you're watching this on Instagram or YouTube, feel free, please, to type in your sun, moon, rising sign in place of birth. And we'll do what we can to put our feet on that sacred ground to honor the energies of your becoming. It's something I'm always encouraging astrologers to do, because the craft of astrology can get so mental and so like syntax language or even mathematical equation based, like just playing by these rules to tell somebody who they are, which I personally struggle with. What about at this time of the year, a baby is born and the trees, in my view, look like they are on fire with red leaves, you know? Like there's actually old, back in the day, birth charts where it is written which direction the wind was blowing from, you know, what animals were first seen, what birds were heard that morning, what stars were seen before sunrise, which is one of the ways we can approximate where the sun is in his annual course. You will never, of course, see which stars the sun is currently aligned to. You'll go blind trying. And this is why our first zodiacs are lunar, because you can actually watch that light of the night to reflect sunlight to your eyes, soul reflecting spirit to a place with the appearance of time and space, so we can make moves, grow, evolve. That's why we're here. Time is a very important piece. But what is time? And how do we learn to see it in the marriage of earth and sky? So I want to talk to you first just about natural time, and then we'll try to deal with clocks. All right. Let's talk about, how should we say this? Sticks and drips. All right. So actually sticks could go a couple ways. So like back before, you know, the tick tock of the mechanical clock and all the gears and whatnot, you know, we might burn candles, or, you know, a standard length of incense. This is still done to this day to approximate time, right? Like tick tock time, right? Let's say, you know, an incense stick this long burns in this amount of time. Now, obviously, that's not going to be a precise science, right? But it's something that was done, that actually is done still in places like candle time, that sense of stick time. But really, I want to talk about that kind of time more in drip time, because eventually we evolved the science of timekeeping into the creation of water clocks, which are really amazing. I can't highly enough recommend you research a little bit about the development of the water clock in different places on Earth, you know, pretty similar time that they were starting to come through. It was a huge deal for like the Hellenistic astrologers. Like this is how you would tell time, especially by day. There's another way that we're going to get to. Because, these days, if I want to cast a birth chart, right? Or if like a child is born, I can just like look at a smartphone, right? That's like keeping pace with some atomic clock, right? And telling me what time it is. I mean, look, even the atomic clock, it's basically the very modern evolution of a water clock or a candle clock, incense clock, something like that, right? So, water clock is basically you have a reservoir of water, right, with a hole in it, which is going to drip periodically. That's like your seconds or whatever, and fill another thing. Now, the issue is the pressure is going to be determined by the amount of water you have in that upper reservoir. So over time, as that reservoir empties, the periodicity of the dripping shifts. It's not like a tick-tock consistent timekeeping device. And so then that thing evolved to the point where like it's dripping into this reservoir is fed back into the upper reservoir. So it always has the same amount of water. And so you get this consistent dripping. They're really genius. Check them out. One of the places on Earth, one of two places, the other being the observatory El Caracol at Chichen Itza, that just cracked me open when I visited there, as if I've had past experience there, and I have no idea, right? But was at the Tower of the Winds in Athens, Greece. And I just went into that place and just broke open. So it's a directionally aligned, 8-sided octagonal tower that was the water clock for the astrologers back in the day that lived in that powerful place, So we could understand something about time. Because, what do we need to cast a birth chart in astrology? Time and space, right? I need your birthday, time, and the place you were born. That's going to determine like where the planets were. They're going to determine your unique geometry of the solar system, which will never repeat. In fact, I don't have to go beyond the sun, moon, and earth. The way that moon was delivering sunlight to our earthly eyes to express how absolutely unique the moment of your becoming was, it will never be repeated. In the way that that was experienced in your birthplace was different than it was down the street, and certainly in the state or country next door or whatever. All right. So sticks and drips, sticks being, candle time or incense time on one level, but that's more like drip time. Sticks being put a stick in the ground. And if you're willing to stand tall, my friends, you are one. Now you're a walking stick, so here's to that. But as we track the seasons of the year, right? Why do we call, and so, sorry, I'm going to speak Northern Hemisphere. I know it's spring down under right now. Why do we call this fall? And, what I was taught is because the leaves are falling from the trees, and there's some truth to this, but I would suggest more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but also the sun is falling in the sky. Now, we're going to be okay. Because once it reaches its bounds, which is called the Tropic of Capricorn, it will then rise. He is born. And then the resurrection, when daylight overcomes night at equinox time, It almost feels like that whole thing is some myth about the sun anyway. So at midday, we can measure the length of a standard stick, or though maybe you're lengthening with your yoga or shrinking with your age, right? Put a stick in the ground and measure the length of the shadow at midday. How do you know it's midday? Because that shadow will point on the meridian. If you're in the northern hemisphere, the sun souths at midday and the shadow norths. And very importantly, it's the shortest shadow of the day. You start there, actually. Just measure the shadow of your stick throughout the hours that you believe is midday. Draw that line on the ground, and the shortest one is pointing either north if you're in the in the northern hemisphere, or it's pointing south if you're in the southern hemisphere. If you're between the tropics, there will be 2 days each year when the sun is directly over your head and no shadows at all, which is an amazing thing. And there'll be times in the year when your midday shadow points north and other times when it points south. At the equator, half the year north, half the year south, because the equator's neither northern or southern hemisphere, it's both, right? But regardless, the midday shadow is the shortest shadow of the day, and it always points in the cardinal direction, north or south, right? So like literally you can work with the shortest shadow of any stick, including yourself, the walking stick, and know when it is midday because it's the shortest shadow of the day. Now, however, some midday shadows are shorter than others because as the sun reaches his midday height, and that's called summer solstice, right? The sun stops what? Stops going up. Let's talk northern hemisphere. That's when the sun ingresses tropical Cancer, because at that time the sun is shining directly above the Tropic of Cancer, for that's where the northern axis of Earth's tilt leads, right? So that's Cancer, Capricorn. Like I've said, and I will always say, like so many systems of ancient wisdom traditions, the tropical zodiac is directionally aligned. It is directionally defined, and it's Gaia's spine, the sword of our stone, the world tree, our rotational axis that defines the cardinal directions on Earth. All right. So when the sun gets to 0 Cancer, it's closest to me in California. I'm at 38 north, 0 Cancer. The Tropic of Cancer is 23.5 degrees north because that's our tilt angle, right? Of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, the sun's getting closer to you at this time. The sun's currently in tropical Scorpio. It's a southern sign. Sagittarius even more so, which will take the sun to its southern bounds, which is the Tropic of Capricorn. By the way, tropic comes from Greek tropikos, which means turn around. Because at that time, solstice, the sun stops moving south, will turn around and start moving north. Now, an experience I'll ask you to remember is that when you're walking towards a building, it appears to grow taller. Okay, well, when the sun's walking towards you, as he does for 6 months of the year, if you live beyond the tropics, it appears as if the sun's getting higher in your sky. And the higher the sun, the shorter the midday shadow. Do you see? Someone's asking in wonderful name translations of light, does midday mean halfway between sunset and sunfall? Not 12 p.m. necessarily. What a brilliant question. Yeah, so sunrise and sunset. Halfway in time between rise and rest, the sun reaches its height, and it has nothing to do with what we now call noon, and everything to do with what we used to call noon. So let's talk about natural time. There's 4 kind of sun on the cross times of the day. 1, he is risen. From a daily perspective, sunrise, ending the night, ending the cold and dangerous hours. So the hours of rest, right? So if you're safe, it might just mean you have to wake up and get to work. You might prefer the night, right? So sunrise, sun rest, pretty like clear times of day, especially if clouds allow, and we can see the solar disk on the land, right? Ascendant, descendant, to speak astrological. You can see when the sun is setting into a flat horizon, especially the ocean, the Libra glyph, right? Half the sun into the flat horizon. Yeah. Halfway in time between sunset and sunrise, the sun will root down beneath the ground, the place of the ancient ones. And by the way, if you're outside at night, and I'm so happy to have been with folks who I showed this to, where they're like, oh, I just felt it right before I do. So let me say what it is first. You'll be outside at night, like I'm outside taking pictures of stars a lot, right? And it's cold. And then suddenly after that, it's really effing cold. Like it happens like this. Right? And sometimes that's because a wind came in or something, but usually like even in a still Arizona desert night, I'm out photographing Orion and just, drinking starlight and in love with nature. And suddenly I'm like, whoo, okay, that's like a whole other level of like commitment to stay out in this mess. And maybe I'm like in the middle of a time lapse. This has happened many times. And I'm like, I think I need to like end that and go somewhere warm. What that is the sun at the IC, the Imum Cele, the bottom of the heavens, which is a cardinal direction. So here in the northern hemisphere, north beneath the ground, the sun roots there before he starts coming up in the middle of the night, which has nothing to do with 12 midnight on your clock, which is artificial time, but halfway in time between sunrest, sunset, and the following sunrise. Yeah. Some would see that as the end of the day and the beginning of the day, some quite opposite to that, which is an interesting trip, right? But the sun rooting a true midnight halfway between sunset and sunrise, you'll never see it. If you know something about where the sun is in the stars, it will be the time when the opposite side of the zodiac is culminating, right? So that's one way we can estimate when true midnight is happening. These days we have charts and clocks and stuff, and thanks to the amazing astronomers and time developers, right, who have helped us do this so we can keep time in this amazing way. Like, it's splendid. But I'm very interested in helping people return their consciousness to how it is without some smartphone that can do your thinking for you or tell you when or where you are, right? It's a fun thing. Like, so this morning, and I still haven't gotten to the car to push the button so that the time is right now that we've had daylight savings time. But you know, the phones and the iPads and the things, the TVs, like, are updating, right? Without any effort. So I don't even know that I slept an extra hour or lost an hour of sleep or whatever the heck it was. All right, let's get back to daylight losing time in a second. The three experiences of cross time that you can see with your eyes are sunrise, sun reach halfway between sunrise and sunset, which is the shortest shadow of the day. It's very easy to measure. There's a lot of different beautiful sundial systems and techniques that have been developed over time to keep natural time. So let's say you're like farm life, sun rises and you're out to work, you know, sun sets and maybe you get to come back in, right? Well, there's a break at midday. And how do you know it's midday? Because the shadow of the stick is on that meridian line, right? So the first time you measure that shortest shadow of the day, you just draw that line in the ground. If you do this today, by the way, in the Northern Hemisphere, you can go out to that line that you drew with the shortest shadow of the day, and you can see it's pointing to Polaris, because we are blessed in our day and age in the Northern Hemisphere to have a star that's aligned to the pole. That's the rotational axis of the Earth, right? So all the stars are spinning about that. Polaris, pole star, North Star. In our day and age, there's not a South Pole star right now, but there's still a point in the sky that all the stars are spinning about. And certainly at midday, you can draw your shortest shadow and it's pointing on the meridian. It's a north-south line, okay? So once you draw that line in the ground, just every day when the shadow of that stick is on that line, you know it's midday. You ring the bell, cats come in for some lunch, and then back to work, right? So it's just very natural time, Earth, Sun time, right? Now understand that we are, when we witness the sun, experiencing Earth astronomy. Why does the sun rise? At least according to modern astronomical thought, which I'm a sincere believer in, because the Earth spins. I don't know that I would have gotten here without having been taught this, but there was once in my life when I was on Haleakala, the House of the Sun in Maui. And when witnessing the sunrise and hearing the chants of many wisdom keepers there, who are often out celebrating the rising of the sun with this beautiful chant, that happens when the light comes and stops not until the sun is fully risen above the ocean from that view. Anyway, I was up there alone, listening to this beautiful chant, contemplating life, and I experienced an earth fall. The sun wasn't rising. I was falling on earth. And again, I'm not sure I would have had that experience had I not had some intellectual idea that that's why the sun rises. I don't know. But it was profound. It really changed my cosmology then. You'll hear me say things like, what is rising when you rose is rising within you. That's how I work with the rising sign. And by the way, I saw some sun, moon, and rising signs and birthplaces here in the chat. You're welcome to put others if you'd like. And we'll play a little bit of that, some earth astrology of the Holy Trinity, of the big three of sun, moon, and rising sign here at the end of this thing. So what is rising when you rose is rising within you. You're here to learn that archetype of your ascendant. I learned that from the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School from Daniel Jamario, Kaelin Castell. I should say, however, it's also very much confirmed in the language of the ancient astrology, who calls that ascendant the horoscope, right? Who the hour marker, but also calls that ascendant the oiax, the rudder of the chart. It's like, this is where you're going. So this is where you're growing. This is what you're learning, but it's also what you will grow. So what was rising when you rose is rising within you, and you can raise it up. You see the eastern skies rising consistently. Why? Because Earth is falling in that direction. We descend into matter to lift the heavens up. Spirit reflects itself through soul into the appearance of time and space, matter, so we can grow. And spirit, otherwise, it's everything. It will never grow, but it will never stop growing because of miracles like you. Spirit reflected, not divided, reflected in its entirety, but in a unique way that will never repeat. This is soul into matter, this place with the appearance of time and space, you see? Can I get an amen? Can I get a like button? You know, that's when I would have hit it if I was watching that video, because I'm a fan of this cosmology, which I've learned from some great teachers, but mostly from Satguru, Teacher Within, in response to the true, library of my earthly experience. Yes, and the moon reflecting sunlight to my earthly eyes, and the way that that's done based upon what sign is on the rise, it's completely reformed my own cosmology. Maybe it will change again. But therefore, the way that I practice astrology, like, I'm not just going to do that according to some rules I was taught. I'm going to do that according to my experience of life, which informs my belief and my faith. And hopefully I'm open-minded and open-hearted enough to allow that to change should new evidence pour in, All right. So natural time, let's talk about natural hours. Or, what astrology these days calls like magical hours or planetary hours versus civil hours. What's a civil hour? You know it, you grew up with it, it's on your clock right now. This idea that every hour is 60 minutes, every minute is 60 seconds. What is a second? If you take a meter-long stick of any material and let it pendulate, that's a second, which is an amazing thing in and of itself. Wait, is that a meter long? I think it's the megalithic yard. And anyway, I digress, and I shouldn't go into places that I can't say with confidence, and that one I cannot. But there is a standard length that pendulates in a second, and vice versa. Right, so we're so familiar with clock time. Right, in clock time, it's like necessary. It's not when you have an astrologer who just goes live whenever he feels keen, but it is if you were following somebody who was like live every day at 11:15 p.m. Pacific Standard, daylight time, but and you want to catch that thing. If you want to catch your plane, right? If you want to teach your class, if you want to meet your client at the right time, obviously we need clock, we need calendar. Right, and not only do we need clock and calendar for these kinds of things, but think about it back in the day, we needed to survive. Yeah, I mean, if you're like a hunter-gathering tribe, you need to know when to be at that right time, where to be at when the berries are on the bush or the herd is around, right? You need to know when to migrate, right? Like, why do the birds and the whales go south and north again? You know what I mean? Like, you need to be in that spirit of the thing. Well, how do you do that? You keep the days. How do you keep the days? So you can count sunrise to sunset, but then you have to know how many days there are in a year. And there's a lot of ways to do this, but one of the most profound ways probably is watching the heliacal risings and settings of stars to estimate where the sun is in the yearly transit of the zodiac. Another one is the length of shadow. So for those of you who've studied your zodiacal history, you'll have come to the Mula Pin in the ancient Chaldean astrology, right? The Babylonian astrology, the way it's typically taught these days. All right, we got 10% camera battery. I better find brevity. And so back in the day, we're talking about like star-based zodiacs, which the tropical zodiac is not. But in the Mula Pin as well, they were tracking the length of the shadow of a gnomon, right? A standing stick. And that's tropical. That's only tropical. That's not sidereal. If you're working with the decans, like stars at night, and back in the day in the land we now call Egypt, right? This was a great and recorded practice, although it's kind of shrouded in mystery because we don't know which stars they were actually talking about. But looking at when a star rises and then the next star of the set's going to rise, like a 24th of the day later. And stars will help us understand where we are in the year. The last star you see rising before sunrise is going to be different today than it will be next week or in 10 days, right? Dividing the year into about 36 slices of 10 days, right? You start learning how long the year is and all sorts of other things. At one point in Egypt, they switched to watching which stars were culminating, which is much easier to do. And we see some of the ancient pyramids, and probably the Great Pyramid itself wasn't completely enclosed, but was this like southern bound shaft, right? With high walls. So you're just seeing what's south. So it's very easy to kind of keep time with what star is happening there. Now, there is, in a way, an agreement with clock time, because at the midheaven, stars are culminating, and the wheel culminates at about 1 degree for every 4 minutes. It's more like 3 minutes and 56 point something seconds, and I don't want to get that technical right now. That's something I would rather teach you if we have beautiful illustrations and things we can use, okay? But telling time with the stars, of course, is an ancient practice until the sun rises. Then you can only tell time with one star called the sun. And since you'll go blind looking at it, it's kind of hard to see where the sun is when it's so bright. Like have the courage to turn the back of your heart to the sun and work with your shadow, do some shadow work, yeah? And the shadow work's going to tune you into daylight time in a really interesting way. All right, so let me retrograde back to this idea of magical or planetary hours versus civil hours. So we have the tick-tock of the clock, and these kind of 60 minutes in an hour, the way that we're doing time now, right? It's been for a long time like this. For civil time, like construct time, more like, cultural agreement time. In that regard, you will find, of course, that in the fall and the winter, when nights are longer than day, you have more hours of darkness than you do of light. Yeah? And, say we get to a place in the year where there's 14 hours of darkness and 10 hours of light in the solar day, sunrise to sunrise, 24 hours of length, right? In planetary hours or magical hours, you just take that length of night and divide it by 12, and the length of day and divide it by 12, right? So if you have 14 civil hours of night, you divide that by 12, those magical or planetary hours are going to be longer than the hours of day, because you divide the daylight time by 12, and then you have these hours. So there'll be times in the year, for example, when like the daylight hours are 50 minutes long and the nighttime hours are 70 minutes long, right? And like working with those different types of experiences, those of you astrologers who are working with Placidus houses, you might not know it, but you're actually tracking the sun through planetary hours. And again, that's like way too large of a topic to teach here without lots of pictures and animations and things that I create for the School of Earth Astrology. All right. Well, let's just talk about like midday time versus clock time. You know, first of all, I live in Richmond, California. We're basically at the western edge of the Pacific time zone. So like I'm experiencing sunrise at a different time than Lake Tahoe is, right? They're like due east of me. And so as far as the Earth spins, this Earth spins west to east, like they're going to experience sunrise before I do. And yet we say we're on the same time or time zone, right? But it's not like you're going to have infinite time zones. You do, because everywhere has its local experience. So the shortest shadow of the day, we used to call that noon. Now we call it local apparent solar noon. Because of course noon, like you and I were taught, it was this thing on a clock that says 12 p.m. And suddenly what was 12 p.m. yesterday is now 11 a.m. Now, on one level, I just want to express a tiny bit of gratitude for daylight losing's crime, because last week when I was driving Koa to school, it was still dark out, and I have to wake him up. We wake up at like 6 a.m. to kind of get him going, get to school, and it's a little harder to wake up in the darkness. I love it because I go out and see Jupiter and Venus right now, and Orion and Sirius. But it'd like to motivate the kid. It's a lot easier that now that same time on the clock looks all illuminated and stuff. All right, I'm going to try a little experiment because brevity is not my specialty. Plug the phone in. Hopefully it still hears me. Somebody on Instagram, if you would, please just write, "We can hear you still." Things didn't change here on the YouTube side. At one point, I'll be able to just blast to both of these things simultaneously. Once Instagram catches up with the times. Can anybody hear this? Thank you, Selena, daughter of the moon. All right, cool. Where were we? Right, so on one level, I'm kind of appreciative of this daylight savings crime thing. And now we're into Pacific Standard Time. Daylight time is actually the summer stuff around here, I guess. And Anna, my beloved Scorpiana, always says this, like, no, actually now we're getting back to like real time, right? But what is real time? It has nothing to do with clock constructs, except for we do need clocks and calendars to, like, you know, get to school on time, get to work on time, pay your taxes on time and such. All right, so I'm just looking at a Astrogold software chart on one side. Actually, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, I'll put this on your screen. And I'm looking at the day of Libra equinox, so west equinox. Why do I call it that? Because that is the time when the sun is due west of the center of Earth, where we all connect. Zero Cancer is literally just where the Earth's northern axis points on the ecliptic, the path of the sun, because it's the plane of Earth's rotation. Like, that's zero Cancer. Zero Capricorn is when the southern pole is leaning towards the sun, that one moment each year when the sun shines directly above the Tropic of Capricorn. Tropic of Capricorn? Tropical Capricorn. At zero Aries, the sun is due east, not of New York or LA, like that's different in any moment on surface experience, but at center of Earth, where we are all one, right? When 0 degrees tropical Aries, which is this point where the ecliptic is crossing the equator towards the north, that point is due east of Earth center. And therefore, by the way, it works like a global ascendant. This is the astronomical foundation of the so-called natural zodiac and of the turning of the ages based upon the movement of this Aries point through the stars, or maybe through sidereal signs. Again, I could write a book, but I won't because I can't. Anyway, so when the sun ingresses tropical Libra, it is due west of Earth center. I mean, just think of that. The Libra glyph is the ultimate image for the west, which is the setting sun. You see half of the solar disk setting into the land. Do you see that? Sometimes you can actually experience, by the way, I'm sorry if Libra used to be for you these balance scales and whatnot, um, because it's actually the image of the setting sun. So is the Ankh, by the way. So what, once you see that, you kind of can't go back. So if that hurts you in any way, my bad. I guess I should have given you a warning. So Libra ingress is when the sun is due west of Earth center, and it's on the equator. Only the equinox points are on the equator. Only the equinox points, which are 0 Aries and 0 Libra. By the way, this has nothing to do with constellations. This is Earth astronomy. Those 2 points rise due east and set due west. The sun is now in Scorpio. Scorpio is a southern sign. It's closer to the southern bounds, which are the Tropic of Capricorn, than the equator. It's south. Scorpio sun, Scorpio moon, Scorpio anything. Now Scorpio Mercury, Scorpio Mars, Scorpio. They rise south of east. They set south of west. They're southern signs. In the northern hemisphere, that means a short trip. They spend less time above the ground than below the ground. In the southern hemisphere, the opposite is true. That's why we're experiencing fall and longer nights in the northern hemisphere, while in the southern hemisphere, spring and longer days. Southern and northern signs. The whole thing is directional. The whole thing is earth-astronomical. And this is the tropical zodiac, which so many just astronomically ignorant people will tell you has nothing to do with astronomy because the signs aren't aligned to the stars in your sky. It's mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing. And I just dream, I literally dream of debating these people, which shows you that I'm immature. Like you didn't know already. Okay. Anyway, let's continue here. So let's look. I'm looking at, and I'm going to share this chart if you're watching on YouTube. Which probably, by the way, folks, is where to watch some of these things, because I'll start sharing charts more, and sadly on Instagram I can't do so. So I'll do my best to also just communicate this in such a way that you don't need the pretty pictures, right? If you're at YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Please share it around. Regardless where you are, please give a like, leave a comment. Let me know that you're feeling this. It'll keep me here. Today's Sunday. It's the day of the sun. Let's talk about the sun. What a wonderful time to talk about daylight losings crime. And right, so this insert rant here. Why do I call it daylight losings crime? Because it takes us away from our natural experience of the turning of the year. Right? I mean, there is a very important natural connection to the seasons. It's one of the rants I typically have around the holidays. It's in the northern hemisphere, right? Like all the twinkling lights of Christmas, which, by the way, like the lights on the tree are actually the stars on the world tree, which is Earth's rotational axis. The star on top is Polaris, and I could teach you what Santa's sleigh is, as well as the dreidel and the menorah. It's all astronomical. Everything's astronomical in my weird worldview, though, so maybe I'm wrong, but, I love to share that stuff anyway. I think I will be doing, by the way, a, sacred astronomy of the holy days transmission, probably like a by donation class this year. So please be on my mailing list at geminibrett.com if you'd like to know about that and other offerings by donation, paid offerings, classes, courses, free stuff too. Like on November 9th, I will be teaming up with Yulia Simas of Cosmic Intelligence Agency and Luis Ribeiro to speak about the challenges of the tropical zodiac due to seasonal opposition, directional opposition, northern, southern hemisphere, right? And I'll show you why the same signs apply regardless of your seasonal experience because they are directional. But you know what? For our sun, moon, earth astrology example here at the end of our jam today, let's work with a southern hemisphere birth. So we can honor that these constellations, which are not the signs, are global, but so are signs. All right, so I'll get back to that. Where was I? Right, ranting. It's weird and it feels to me somewhat criminal that our natural embodied experience of wintertime should be conserving energy, going within, rationing, yes. And we have a long-standing tradition of gift giving, of feast, actually. No, sorry to vegans, vegetarians, actually anyone here. Like, one of the reasons for the winter feast is like there's so many animals that aren't going to make it through the winter, or if they do, you're going to have to sacrifice humans of your tribe to do so, because they, of course, require food and whatnot. And so oftentimes there's this kind of like large sacrifice of many of the animals, right? And then there's this feast. It's also like, you can only preserve your fruits and vegetables for so long through the winter time when they can't be harvested, right? So instead of letting things just rot, right, you have the big feast, right? So, I mean, this is old school, and it's a way also that we honor, the guides and guidesses of that time, and the ancestors that are going to help see us through, yeah. And so there's a lot of the traditions and ornaments on trees and things that actually go like way back into so-called pagan traditions from around the world. It's a really wonderful thing to think about and talk about at that time, connect to, right? That's in you. But when we're just kind of consumer Christmasing, right, and everything's bright and light, it's like you don't get to experience the darkness, which is a necessary human experience if you really want to like key into your path of what you're doing here, which again, spirit reflects itself through soul into a place with the appearance of time and space so you can grow. And part of your growth is going to be riding the wave of light and darkness by day and night, right? By summer and winter. Yeah, and so the daylight losing's crime magic trick, again, there's this old quote, or maybe not, but it's genius regardless. If only the white man thinks he can cut the end off the blanket, sew it to the other side of the blanket, and have a longer blanket, right? It takes us from that natural flow. So I look at the clock yesterday morning at 6 a.m. I'm out in the dark sky. I look at the clock today at 6 a.m. and suddenly it's light. What the fuck happened? Magic. Right now, on one level, sure, cutting the end off the blanket of the day and sewing it to the other end of the blanket does not make the blanket longer, but it makes your experience of that, where you are on the daily blanket different. Sorry if I've taken that metaphor way too far. There is something, again, to be driving Koa to school and the sun is rising after we've battled like getting up and going, versus getting up and going where the sun is risen and it's light and it's just kind of easier to go about that thing, right? And it turns out that standard time has just been reactivated where I live. Some places are ahead of us. Some places I think are wise enough to not to do this at all. So at least your clock experience of time is more aligned to the natural flow. All right. So now back to this chart. And thanks to Astrological software for making this easy for me. I'm just putting the sun on the 10th, which means midday. That's the sun at the midheaven of a chart, by the way. So astrology practices first and foremost get directions. So measure the length of the shadow throughout the course of the day. The shortest shadow will point due north if you're in the northern hemisphere, due south if you're in the southern hemisphere, either north or south if you're in the tropics, unless it's one of the 2 days when the sun is overhead, which can only happen in the tropics because the bounds of the sun's journey are south, the Tropic of Capricorn, and north, the Tropic of Cancer. Tropical Earth astronomy. All right. So you measure that shadow at midday. The shortest shadow points on the meridian, right? Therefore, put that stick in the ground, and every day you'll just see when the shadow hits that meridian, it's midday. And that on an astrology chart is the sun at the MC, the medium celli, the middle of the heavens. Okay. Which will be always like where I am in California, due south. So like when I'm working this at night, there's a place in the bricks outside I can stand and I can work with the pine tree over here. It's just pointing to the meridian, and that way I can tell what stars at the MC, and that's where I start to be able to see the chart in the sky, which is something I teach in my sacred astronomy classes. Let's get away from just pushing a button to know what's going on with the heavens. Let's return to our natural experience of that so we can know like how it all began and have a more intimate and embodied sensual earth astronomy experience, you see? All right. So I have a chart on the YouTube screen that says 101:44 p.m. and it's September 23rd, 23. If you're into that whole Gregorian trip, bro. This is when, on the day that the sun ingressed Libra and was therefore due west of the center of the earth where we all connect and heading into southern signs, closer to the southern hemisphere, which is Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, coming back from the southern extreme, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. These are southern signs, yeah? All right, so the sun enters the southern signs at west equinox, which is sun ingress tropical, not sidereal, not constellational, tropical Libra, the earth zodiac, all right? Based upon the cross of ecliptic year and equator day. And here locally in Richmond, California, where I live, the sun, the center of the sun culminated, was south at 101:44 p.m. Okay, so we had noon, true noon, shortest shadow of the day at 102. And I'm just going to go to the next day and just keep doing this. And I'm just going to like wrap the, let me do 7 days at a time. 7 days later on September 30th, the sun culminated at 12:59. Clock time. 12:57, 7 days later, October 7th. 7 days later, 12:55 on October 14th. 7 days later, on October 21st, 12:54, right? So it's getting earlier and earlier. Why? Because the daylight hours are falling, right? We're falling into more darkness than light. And the sun is literally falling in its midday height, hence the fall, not just falling leaves. The sun is falling in the sky. It starts at summer solstice time. That's the height of the light and starts coming down, but it's really coming down fast in the fall time, okay? So October 21st, 12:54, October 22nd, 12:53 in some seconds. It gets to 12:52 in some seconds on November 1st. On Halloween midday, exactly 12:53 p.m. here in Richmond, California, in our current place in Pacific time zone, right? Time construct, time, civil time. All right, well, 7 days later, November 7th, 11:53 a.m. Wait, what happened? Because I was at, let me rewind here, and I'll just go, I guess, day by day. October 31st, 12:53 p.m. November 1st, 12:52:58. November 2nd, 12:52:57. November 3rd, 12:52:56. 12:52:57. 12:52, oh wait, sorry. Yeah, 12:52:57 on November 4th. November 5th, today, 11:52:58. Wait a second. It's been changing by like seconds, and suddenly it changed by an entire hour. Daylight losing's crime. That being said, midday today, as the Seattle Seahawks are defeating the Baltimore Ravens, locally, 11:52:58 a.m., November 5th, the sun will south. Now that's, of course, much closer to clock noon, 12 noon on the clock, right? So as Scorpiana has told me, my beloved wisdom keeper of this house, like we're actually going more towards natural time now. Because it would be nice, like in your local natural experience, sun at the meridian, the height of the light every day, that's midday. That's true noon. You feel it's natural noon. So it would be nice if our clocks would reflect that. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead. Well, I'm just going to keep doing this. In 11 days, 11:53, Now I'm going to go to December 1st because you're all into that Gregorian thing. The sun then locally here in Richmond, California will culminate for true noon at 11:58. Let's go to December 21st when the sun ingresses tropical Capricorn and is therefore furthest from me here in the northern temperate climes. The sun will be at 29:41 Sagittarius at midday, so just coming to the solstice, coming to the tropics, 12:07 p.m. on the clock. Right, so later in the day than today, where the daylight's a little bit longer. But of course, the sun will be rising later and later, right? The nights are growing longer and all that. So I'm just gonna not report and read these off. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the clock time changing at Sun at the MC through the days. I'll read every now and then. I'm at February 1st now. The sun's at 12:30 tropical Aquarius. And here locally it culminates at 12:23 p.m. So later in the day because the days are longer. And I'm going to go to sun at 15 Pisces. That's March 4th, 2024, 12:21 p.m. Let me take the sun into Aries, so equinox time, which this year it looks like it'll be March 19th. The sun's at the midheaven at 1:16 p.m. What happened? What happened is somewhere in February, the daylight losings crime. Actually, it looks like it's March. I guess I should know this. On March 9th, 2024, the sun culminates at 12:19:41. And on March 10th at 1:19:25. So what if we just didn't do that? I'm going to put the sun into Cancer. So longest day of the year here at the Northern Hemisphere, right? And then see when the sun culminates that day. And the answer is 1:11 p.m. Like if that said 12:11 versus when the sun ingresses Libra, equinox time, right? When there's about 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night, there's not exactly because the sun's a disk, not a point, and that's kind of a long story for another time. But that day, the sun will culminate at 1:01 p.m. What if that said 12:01 p.m.? Like that's where we should be. Let me bring the sun to Capricorn and look at when the sun culminates. It says 12:07 p.m. All right, let me put the sun into Aries, the east equinox point, and look at the time of the day that the sun culminates. And it's like 1:17 p.m. That should say 12:17 p.m., right? And still, like it should be just noon. It is. In your local experience, the height of the sun at midday, noon. I really encourage you to make a very simple sundial. Those of you who have been in the Astrology school, right? Put the stick in the ground, draw the cross on the ground, right? Work the directions, right? Become an earthling, yeah? But then like trying to deal with how we rectify like true noon experience, the sun on the shadow line, versus, clock time and the kind of funny little tricks you have to play. It's an amazing thing. All right. So why do I rant about daylight losings crime? Why do I call it that? Because it takes us out of our natural flow of time, and it also takes our clock experience of noon far away from noon. And so let's just stick with the so-called standard time. I mean, preferably we would tune the clocks in such a way that the sun culminates at equinox at 12 p.m. But we do have an infinite amount of time zones. It's like wherever you stand, that's your natural time zone. If we want to do clock time, then it makes sense to have this time zone convention, and you're only going to have so many of those. The right number of those, by the way, would be 24. And then you're going to have situations where there's places like I do, like at the far eastern side of Nevada, that are receiving sunrise way before I am here in Western California at the Pacific Ocean, though we're in the same so-called time zone, right? Is Nevada Pacific time? Anyway, Tahoe, in my experience, the sun will rise at a different time every day, right? Okay. So let's at least get the clocks to try to better approximate our natural experience. And if we did, we just wouldn't play this like trick. We wouldn't spring forward and then just contemplate what's happening. Basically, the sun would be rising really early in the day. Well, it is. And it would be setting a little earlier. So if I want to take people out to watch the sky, I don't have to rally them out there at 10 p.m. Oh, the rants. I have so many. And they're a little more organized than they might sound. It's a little easier when I'm showing the slides and whatnot. All right. So, as it has been recently, and as I would really like for it to be, I would like to end these streams with Earth astronomy expression of a native's birth experience. And here we're going to work with Els, who was born in Sydney, Australia. So down under. Right now, if you're in Australia, isn't California down under? And, you know, there's a very important astronomical reason why some of the wisdom keepers in the Southern Hemisphere taught that the Southern Hemisphere is like the stern of the ship and the Northern Hemisphere is the bow. And this will be a very principle to what I will be sharing in this Cosmic Intelligence Agency jam around the global truth of the tropical zodiac because it's directional. Now, again, in California, the sun souths at midday, the shadow norths. In Sydney, Australia, the sun norths at midday, the shadow south. So aren't the experience of the directions opposite? Yes, but the Earth is moving north through space because the sun, our solar system, are. We're moving generally towards Vega, a northern star, and away from Sirius, a southern star. You'll never see Sirius at Earth's North Pole. You'll never not see Vega. Well, you will when the sun's out, but you'll never see Sirius at Earth's North Pole. You'll never see Vega at Earth's South Pole. We're moving north, right? So you can see why some of these ancient indigenous wisdom keepers of the land we now call Australia described the Northern Hemisphere like the bow of the ship and the Southern Hemisphere like the stern. This is one of the most important keys to the very truth of the global earthstronomical tropical zodiac. All right. So many of us, when we hear Cancer sun, wait a second, let me see if I'm getting this right. So birthplace is Sydney, Australia. So bring yourself to that opera house. One of the most beautiful buildings on earth. 26-degree Cancer, sun at 26 Cancer, ascendant at 26 Capricorn, moon at 2 Aquarius. Okay, so let's just start with the sun. What does 26 Cancer sun mean? Now, some of you are like, oh, the sun is near the projection of Procyon, one of Mercury's magical stars. Right on. But you can't see that because the sun. And Procyon's rather far from the ecliptic anyway. The sun was definitely in the constellation of the Twins, which hosts the northern lean of Earth's axis and nearby, right? That's 0 Cancer. So when Elle was born, the Earth was somewhere like this in our annual orbit, right? The sun had already northed because Earth brought the sun in our revolution to its northern point, right? We experience Earth's astronomy by witnessing the sun. Earth's spin through sunrise and sunset. Earth's revolution or annual orbit, the secondary motion through sun moving through the sign and dancing on the horizons. Everywhere on the earth, when the sun is in Cancer, it's rising extremely north of due east. It's setting extremely north of due west. In the northern hemisphere, that's the long trip, because it will have to go northeast, south, northwest. In Sydney, Australia, that's the short trip, because it will go northeast, north, northwest. But regardless, the tropical zodiac's directional. Cancer is north. North is far from Sydney, Australia, right? So when I was born, the sun had already reached its northern peak and was on the way back down. But the motion in the solstice signs is very minimal, because what? When, like, just think about when you're driving a car, like if you're driving north and you forgot something and you have to go back south, you know, you're going to stop, put it in reverse, or maybe turn around, right? Like as you're turning around, at some point you're stopped, you're not moving north or south, right? So that the shift at the solstices where the sun stops, or the tropikos, Greek for turnaround, it's like very minimal. And at equinox time, we're really moving in one direction or the other rapidly. So there's this kind of solsticing. And of course, Sydney, Australia, the solsticing of the Cancer sun means winter solstice, right? So, oh, you're born shortly after, as you know, after the longest night of the year. The sun is born. Maybe would be a better time to celebrate Christmas if you want to be true to your seasonal experience, since that holy day is about the sun being born, like so many ancient days were. It'd be very interesting to find out how the local wisdom keepers celebrated solstice there. And of course, you're born when the nights are long and the days are short. Winter time. Now, winter time in Sydney, Australia is less extreme than it is in other places. And this, of course, is going to do with how far from the equator Sydney is. Sydney is also, of course, a coastal town on Australia's southeast coast, right? I want to look up, because I can, that your latitude is 34 south of the equator, right? That's pretty similar to like Washington, D.C. Is that true? Maybe a little further south in the northern hemisphere. So I just want to try to compare this a little bit, though I've been to Sydney now twice, thankfully, and hopefully get to spend more time there. Once when I was very young. I think it's funny now that I consider 18 to be very young. I didn't used to. Anyway, yeah, try to like compare that to some of my local experience of what the sun does when it's 34, or what the seasons do when I am 34 degrees away from the equator. Yeah, because there's a reflection here, and still every place is going to be completely unique, right? So Sydney's going to experience that seasonal expression of the sun in 26 Cancer, differently than Melbourne will, right? Because Sydney's on the coast and Melbourne is not, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd really need to kind of be in Sydney at that time of the year to understand something about how at 26 Cancers, of course, you get to experience this at every birthday, and they won't be exactly the same, but I really encourage you to go look at the state of, the leaves and the flowers and whatnot. Of course, you know, what's happening in the wintertime, right? It's our conifers that are still green and not much on the deciduous trees yet, yes? So I think importantly, and this is like sun sign astrology, although it typically teaches only the seasonal expressions of a temperate northern hemisphere experience, like one of the gifts of the kind of sun sign consciousness is to really honor the seasonal essence of a solar return, of a birthday, right? Okay, well, then I like to talk about the seasons of the day. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, sunrise is like spring. And midday is like summer, and sunset. Let me do this southern hemisphere. Sunrise is like spring. Midday is like summer. Sunset is like autumn. Midnight is like winter, when the sun is born. But it is resurrected at sunrise. He is risen. Yeah? So where are we in the seasons of the day if the sun is in Cancer and the ascendant is Capricorn? Someone please write, wherever you're watching this live, what time of day, and get the clock out of it. What time of day is it when the sun is in Cancer and the rising sign is Capricorn? And I'm going to wait until I see the right answer on the screen, and not from the being whose chart we're looking at here, at least for her Holy Trinity or Big Three. Anyone, what time of day is it? And please don't bring the clock into this. What time of day is it when Capricorn is rising and there's a Cancer sun? Thank you, Moe. Sunset. Now, without the specific degrees, I can't tell you when Capricorn's rising and Cancer, the opposite sign, which hosts the sun. I can't tell you if the sun is above the ground or already below. I can tell you that it's winter time in Sydney and Australia, and so maybe we don't get to see it all, right? Maybe the sky's clouded. But if it's not, right, is the sun above the ground about to set or below the ground having just set? I don't know unless I get specific degrees, which actually Elle offered here. 26 Cancer ascendant, 26, or it's 26 Cancer sun, 26 Capricorn ascendant. So born at exact sunset, which actually brings us back into the riddles of natural time. What is exact sunset? On our charts, we're looking at the middle point of the sun, which is a disk that spans about half a degree. Now, there's other like atmospheric considerations like refraction and other fabulous things. But let's just say you're looking at, in this case, the center of the sun setting, like Elle's born at that time of the day. That is the Libra glyph. Half the sun is above the gums and unto southwest of Sydney. No, sorry, northwest. Cancer sets northwest, right? The ascendant Capricorn is rising southwest. This is why the ascendant, really the ascendant-descendant axis, were called the rudder. Because every day, the ascendant degree rudders back and forth. The rising place of the ecliptic rudders back and forth north and south of due east. The setting north and south of due west. When the ascendant is south of east, Capricorn, the descendant, Cancer, is south of west, right? So we're watching, let me try that again. When the ascendant, Capricorn, is south of east, the descendant, Cancer, is north of west, right? So at the time of Elle's becoming, the sun is setting northwest, like literally we have the center of the sun right into the horizon. Now maybe already set into the trees or into the city buildings of Sydney from where she was born. It's hard to say. But if we had that perfect flat horizon image, we get that Libra glyph, right? Half the sun above the horizon. Yeah. So this is the beginning of the autumn of the day. Yeah. Entering the darkness, going down under, right? And then midnight is like winter solstice. So we have the winter, kind of the beginning of the winter of the year, Cancer, sun in Sydney, Australia, the beginning of the autumn of the day, sun right at the descendant. The moon, when Elle was born, was at 2 degrees Aquarius. All right, so everyone close your eyes, please. Sun is in Cancer. Sun is 26 Cancer. Where would the full moon be? If she was born the exact full moon, right? In other words, what degree is opposite 26 Cancer? And the answer is 26 Capricorn, right? Aquarius is after Capricorn. So, Elle is born very much like full moon. Look, her sun is at 26 Cancer. The moon's at 2 Aquarius. It's only 6 degrees beyond the exact opposition to the sun. There's a really interesting thing with moon phase. When the moon is new, which of course is a no moon, we can't see the moon when conjunct sun, right, under the beams of the sun. And when the moon is full, when the moon is opposite the sun, in Earth's zodiac, the tropical zodiac, the moon looks full for many, many days. When the moon is at the squares, the phase changes rapidly. When new or full, when conjunct or opposite sun, the phase, like the percent of illumination, changes very gradually. It's a trip I don't quite understand. So no doubt L's moon appeared to be absolutely full. How do we know it's not? How do we know that the moon had already reached solar opposition? Well, we look at a chart. But if we don't have a chart, if we're in the chart, which is our astronomical, feet on the ground, natural experience, how do we know? And the answer is the sun is setting and the moon has not yet risen. Now, that being said, Elle, I would need to know where your lunar nodes are. Okay, because let's say you have the south node in Scorpio, and so your Aquarius moon is extremely south of the ecliptic by celestial latitude, then I bet you were born, the moon had already risen. Actually, I'm running out of time, but Elle, would you write that, please? Would you write the degree of either your north lunar node or your south lunar node? And thanks so much for other folks here who have entered your sun, moon, and rising sign. Definitely look at yours another time. I'm doing this daily right now, So please join the live stream. If you're at YouTube, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you're notified. I'm a little erratic with when I'm going live, but on Mondays I'm talking about moon, and Tuesdays Mars, like that. On Sunday the sun, and definitely our experience of sunlight. So prime time to talk about and rant about daylight losing's crime, all right? Okay, so South Node is in Virgo when Elle's born, and the moon's in Aquarius. If the South Node's in Virgo, the North Node's in Pisces. If the moon is in Aquarius, she hasn't yet met her North Node. The moon has southern latitude, probably only 1 degree south. Maybe 1.5 degrees south of the ecliptic. In the southern hemisphere, the moon would actually, in southern latitude, rise before the degree she projects to. There is a chance, Elle, that you were born literally, we know you were born right when the sun was setting. The moon might be rising in that exact moment, even though she's past solar opposition. A way you can confirm that, Elle, if you'd like to, is get a reading with me, GeminiBrett.com. Or look to an astrocartography map at the moment of your birth and see if the sun setting line and the moon crossing line intersect at Sydney, Australia. It's going to be super close. It's the most magical time when you're actually able to hold the luminaries on the horizons. Right? So the full moon rises at sunset and sets at sunrise. However, because the full moon has her own path, it's not going to be the exact opposition unless it's an eclipse, a lunar eclipse, when the moon rises at sunset and sets at sunrise. Have to be the center of the eclipse in your personal local experience. Okay, I've got to go. Get down with some birds. But I do want to just finish with this. Capricorn rising, the wisdom of the elders, the counsel of grandmothers, tradition keepers, maintaining natural law for the 7 future generations. This is rising in you. Cancer sun setting. This gift of nurturing, but the Aquarius moon reflecting that Cancer light. How can we have a revolution of nurturing? Some of this will be balancing Cancer, waters, feelings, Aquarius, air, thought. To balance that in a way so that we can maintain the course, not only in heart, but in mind. So we don't want to get out of the mind and get into the heart entirely. We do, but we also want to get out of the heart and get into the mind, separate those two, and then bring them back together. This is part of the medicine that you come in with to help learn and then teach, share, and guide us through this, the soil, the root, the stern of the earth, Capricorn, the ancient ways, the deep understanding. So I've said many times, I don't like to use this word aboriginal because it means not original. And sorry to be racist, but I'll just say it's like a colonist's trick. All right. But I hope that you have and will connect to the teachings of the ancient wisdom keepers of this land we now call Australia, because they're going to be able to like more quickly, right, connect you to in the knowledge of the dream lines, or song lines as they're called, in the veins of the earth. And it will help you bring an entire new technology of nurturing and love to the future of this world. Or so I believe. That is written in the song of your soul. Thanks so much for playing, y'all. Nice to see you here. Hopefully I'll be back around to talk about Moon and her weekly dance tomorrow on Moon Day. Although it's a very busy day tomorrow with students and clients, I'm very honored to have the opportunity in my work to tune into soul songs with so many amazing growing beings like yourself. Thank you for honoring me here with the present of your presence. If you would like to spend some time one-on-one, GeminiBrett.com is where you can book a session. All right. See you in space, y'all.